The museum was quiet that morning, the kind of silence that makes every cough echo through marble halls. Dust hung in the air like a slow snowfall, stirred only by the shuffle of cleaning rags and the dull scrape of brushes. In one of the museum's least visited wings stood a neglected Greco-Roman statue, a chipped bust of a forgotten philosopher, its once gleaming marble dulled by time. Few visitors stopped to look at it, and fewer still cared to read the tiny plaque beneath. But to a young intern with little more than elbow grease and stubborn patience, it was his assigned task. Polish it until it looked presentable. Elias, the intern, bent over the base with tired eyes and sore hands. He had been working unpaid shifts for weeks, silently enduring the arrogant smirks of senior staff who dismissed him as little more than a janitor with academic dreams. He wanted to be an archaeologist one day, but for now, the closest he could get to history's treasures was scrubbing the grime off them. "This is all I am to them," he thought bitterly, running a cloth across the bust's surface. A pair of hands, not a mind, not a voice. As he wiped the side of the statue, his rag snagged on something rough. He leaned closer. Along a shallow crack near the base was a series of faint incisions, half hidden beneath centuries of dust. At first glance, they looked like scratches, the kind any careless mover might leave. But when Elias brushed carefully with the tip of his cloth, his breath caught. The lines weren't random. They curved, intersected, repeated. Symbols. For a moment he froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "No, it can't be." He traced the carvings with trembling fingers. The shapes reminded him of something he had seen in a textbook, an archaic shorthand used by Greek scribes to mark catalogs or indexes. His mind raced. Why would a statue bear such markings? And why here, hidden where only someone cleaning it would notice? The thought filled him with a strange electricity, as if time itself had reached through the stone and placed a secret in his hands. He looked around the empty gallery. No one else was there. No one else would care. The senior curator would probably laugh if he mentioned it. Still, he felt the undeniable pull of discovery. Elias bent closer, whispering as if the statue might answer. "What are you hiding from me?" His words bounced back from the cold marble floor, swallowed by the silence of the hall. The boy's mind flickered to his late grandfather, a schoolteacher who had once inspired his love of history. He remembered sitting at the old man's desk, hearing stories of Alexandria, the great library that held the wisdom of the ancient world before it was devoured by fire. "Imagine," his grandfather had said, eyes glinting with wonder, "a place where every book, every scroll, every secret of civilization lived together. If even a fragment of it survived, it could change everything we know." The memory made his pulse quicken. What if this wasn't just scratches? What if it was a code, a breadcrumb left behind by someone who once knew? The idea was too wild, too dangerous. But it had already taken root in him. He quickly pulled a notebook from his pocket and sketched the markings. His hands shook with urgency. Each line, each angle, he copied as precisely as he could. He felt like a thief, stealing whispers from the past. Behind him, the sound of shoes clicking against marble startled him. Elias shoved the notebook into his coat just as Dr. Rowan, the head curator, entered. The man's presence filled the room like a storm cloud. Tall, immaculately dressed, with silver hair and a sneer that rarely softened, Rowan had built his reputation on belittling others. "Still scrubbing the forgotten ones, I see," Rowan said dryly, glancing at the statue with bored eyes. "Don't waste your time, boy. That piece is of no significance. Polish it, put it back, and move on." Elias lowered his gaze, muttering, "Yes, sir." Inside, however, his heart screamed with defiance. If only Rowan knew what was carved here. If only he cared to look. But he didn't. To Rowan, interns were invisible, and statues were nothing unless they earned the museum money or headlines. When Rowan left, Elias let out the breath he had been holding. He pressed his hand against the cool stone, a quiet vow forming in his chest. "You think this is nothing," he thought fiercely, picturing Rowan's disdainful face. But I'll prove you wrong. I'll show them all that even a nobody can find what the great minds overlooked. As the light from the high windows dimmed with evening, Elias finished polishing the bust. But his notebook now contained something far more valuable than a clean surface. Hidden within its pages was a secret code, a whisper from antiquity, waiting to be unraveled. And as Elias tucked the notebook against his chest, a certainty settled over him. His life was no longer ordinary. The path ahead would lead to something far greater, something that could rewrite history itself. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Dr. Rowan's life. The marble statue loomed silently, its carved eyes gazing into eternity. As if aware of the storm Elias had just set in motion, Elias sat hunched over a wooden desk in the museum's dim staff room, his notebook open, the copied symbols staring back at him like a puzzle, begging to be solved. The hum of a faulty fluorescent light above buzzed intermittently, but he didn't notice. He was too absorbed, his pen tracing possibilities around the markings. The intern's knowledge of Greek was basic nothing beyond what a curious student might pick up from borrowed textbooks. Still, there was something oddly familiar about these scratches. They weren't letters in the conventional sense, but compressed signs, like shorthand. He remembered reading once that ancient librarians used special symbols to organize massive scroll collections. It made sense. A hidden system for cataloging knowledge, one that only insiders could read. His pulse raced as he whispered to himself, could this be a librarian's mark? The thought was intoxicating. If true, it meant the statue wasn't merely decorative. It was a marker, a clue left by someone who wanted the right eyes to find it centuries later. The door creaked, snapping him from his trance. Fellow interns wandered in for their lunch break, carrying paper bags and chattering loudly about weekend plans. Elias quickly closed the notebook, slipping it under his arm. He knew instinctively that this discovery couldn't be shared. Not yet. They would laugh, just as Rowan would. Or worse, they might take it from him. But even as he tried to act casual, the secret burned inside him. He couldn't stop. That night, long after the museum closed, Elias found himself in the archives, surrounded by stacks of manuscripts and dusty catalogs. His keycard, meant only for storage access, gave him entry, though he knew he was bending the rules. The air was stale, thick with the smell of paper and time. He spread the notebook across the desk and compared the carved code with faded texts. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the rustle of pages and his frustrated sighs. Nothing fit perfectly. Some marks seemed to align with Greek numerals, others resembled indexing lines from Hellenistic catalogs. Slowly, the beginnings of a pattern emerged. Internal doubt gnawed at him. What if I'm chasing nothing? What if Rowan was right? His hand trembled slightly as he scribbled notes. But then, amid the mess of ink and parchment, something clicked. The sequence matched a reference system described in an obscure papyrus fragment notations, believed to have been used in Alexandria's great library to identify subject categories. Elias's eyes widened. His chest tightened. It's real. This is real, he breathed, half in disbelief, half in awe. But the thrill quickly twisted into fear. He wasn't supposed to be here. If Rowan or any senior curator found him digging into the archives after hours, he could lose his internship, his only foothold in the world of history. Yet he couldn't stop himself. Curiosity had become compulsion. He copied references, aligning them against the marks from the statue. Piece by piece, the meaning unfolded. The scratches weren't random, but a fragment of a larger index. A breadcrumb trail leading somewhere. But to where? The next morning, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, Elias approached Rowan with cautious optimism. He thought, foolishly, that maybe the curator would see the value if he explained. Standing at the doorway of Rowan's polished office, he cleared his throat. Sir, I think I've found something on one of the statues. Some markings that look like cataloging signs, maybe even tied to ancient. Rowan looked up from his desk, his expression as cold as marble. "Markings?" he interrupted, tone heavy with disdain. "On that worthless bust? Don't waste my time with fantasies. You're an intern, not a scholar. Stick to cleaning duties." Elias felt the sting like a slap. Heat rose in his cheeks. He opened his mouth to protest, to plead, but Rowan's sharp glare cut him down. "Close the door behind you." Humiliation churned in Elias's stomach as he walked away, fists clenched. Inside his head, though, a defiant voice shouted louder than the shame. "He's wrong. I know he's wrong." That night, back in his small apartment, Elias spread out his notebook again. The words of Rowan rang in his ears, not as deterrence, but as fuel. If no one would believe him, then he would prove it himself, even if it meant working in secret, even if it meant risking everything. He stared at the symbols until they blurred, his mind fighting exhaustion. Somewhere in those lines lay the key to something greater, something history had buried, and he would not stop until he found it. The markings weren't just scratches. They were a code in plain sight, ignored by scholars, waiting for a pair of invisible hands, his hands to bring them to life again. The days that followed were a blur of quiet defiance. Elias polished statues and swept marble floors with the same bowed head as always, but inside him burned a secret rebellion. Every break, every stolen hour after closing, he returned to his notebook. He couldn't let it go. The markings on that statue haunted him, demanding to be unraveled. Yet the more he worked, the more Rowan's words echoed in his skull. "You're an intern, not a scholar." Elias clenched his jaw each time he remembered. The humiliation gnawed at him, feeding both his rage and his determination. He would prove Rowan wrong. He had to. One evening, as Elias sat cross-legged on the archive floor, surrounded by scroll facsimiles and faded codices, another intern, Marcus, wandered past and snickered. "Still playing detective, Eli? Careful, you'll start seeing treasure maps in coffee stains." Elias didn't look up. He pressed harder into his notes, pretending the jab didn't pierce. But inside, his chest tightened with shame. The others all saw him as nothing more than a naive dreamer, too eager to matter, too insignificant to be taken seriously. Their laughter was salt in a wound already carved by Rowan. But that night, as he sat alone in his dim apartment, Elias's sorrow twisted into steel. He whispered to the empty room, "Mock me all you want. I'll keep going, even if I have to do this alone." And so he did. The breakthrough came 3 nights later. Cross-referencing his sketches with a cataloging fragment attributed to Callimachus, the famed librarian of Alexandria, Elias noticed that the statue's marks mirrored one of Callimachus's category symbols, a looping sign meant to indicate hidden collection. His heart hammered. The scratches weren't random, they were deliberate, a librarian's code pointing to a secret repository. He stared at the page, electricity running through him. The thought made his palms sweat. Could the bust itself be a clue to a hidden trove once linked to Alexandria? But the thrill was quickly met with despair. Who would ever believe him? Rowan had made it clear. Interns were invisible. Even if he shouted the discovery from the rooftops, no one in authority would care. They would mock him, dismiss him, perhaps even steal his work. Elias sat back, pressing his hands over his face. His grandfather's voice returned in memory, warm but steady. "History doesn't care about titles, Elias. It only listens to the ones brave enough to chase it." With that, resolve surged again. He picked up his pen, almost growling under his breath. "Fine. If no one else will see it, I'll prove it myself." But the secrecy weighed heavily. During the day, he endured Rowan's sarcasm and the sly smirks of his peers. At night, his solitude felt crushing. More than once, he questioned his own sanity. What if I'm chasing shadows? What if they're right and I'm just foolish? The doubts tore at him, but every time he stared at the symbols, the shapes felt undeniable, alive with intent. Someone, centuries ago, had carved them for a reason. Elias couldn't abandon that whisper from the past, not when it had chosen him to hear it. His chance to act came unexpectedly. Rowan announced at a staff meeting that the West Wing, including the statue Elias had cleaned, would be temporarily closed for renovations. Artifacts would be moved to storage, possibly for years. Elias's heart dropped. If he didn't act soon, the statue and its secrets would vanish into crates and locked basements. That night, he lingered after the others left, staring at the bust as workers began boxing up displays. He ran his fingers once more over the faint carvings, memorizing every line. A strange thought flickered in his chest, half terror, half exhilaration. What if this is the beginning of something far greater than me? In that moment, the boy no one respected made a choice. He would follow the code wherever it led. Rowan's mockery, his peers' laughter, the risk of failure, it no longer mattered. Elias slipped his notebook into his bag, his jaw set, his eyes burning with resolve. He didn't yet know where the path would take him, only that he was walking it alone. And though the world might laugh, the markings on that statue whispered louder still. The archives were a labyrinth, endless rows of shelves heavy with forgotten tomes, manuscripts no one had opened in decades, even centuries. Elias had grown used to their silent company, the stale smell of parchment and dust, his only companions. But tonight, something was different. He felt the code tugging at him, a silent thread pulling him deeper between the shelves. Clutching his notebook, he traced the loops and angles of the carved symbols again. The hidden collection mark, the subtle variations, the repeated slashes, it was more than a catalog entry. He was convinced now. It was a breadcrumb. But where did it lead? Hours passed. He dragged his fingers along spines, his eyes scanning titles by the flickering light of a desk lamp. His exhaustion blurred letters into shapes. But then, something caught his breath. A manuscript, tucked between larger volumes, bound in cracked leather. Its spine bore no label, only a faint design that looked eerily familiar. The same looping mark from the statue. Elias's pulse thundered. He eased it off the shelf, cradling it like treasure. The cover creaked open, releasing a puff of air stale with centuries. Inside, the text danced with ancient Greek letters, their ink faded but legible. At first glance, it appeared to be a commentary on philosophy, dense with references to Aristotle and Plato. But Elias had learned to distrust surfaces. He ran his fingers across the margins, eyes narrowing, their small notations, no bigger than scratches, scrawled faintly between the lines. The same shorthand symbols. His hands trembled as he copied them down. They weren't random. Together, they formed coordinates, or at least directions, a kind of encoded map. His lips parted, whispering in disbelief. Alexandria. The name left his tongue like a prayer. The notations referenced catalog entries Elias recognized from his research collections once housed in the Great Library. Some even described restricted chambers, secret vaults beyond the public halls. He sank into a chair, clutching the manuscript to his chest, tears pricking his eyes. Could it be true? Could this forgotten book hold directions to what remained of the lost Library of Alexandria? His joy was short-lived. The door to the archives slammed open. Rowan's voice echoed down the hall. "Elias!" Panic surged through him. He stuffed the manuscript into his bag, snapping his notebook shut. His mind raced. Had Rowan been watching him? Had someone reported his late-night visits? The curator's footsteps grew louder. Elias ducked behind a row of shelves, his heart hammering so loudly he feared it would give him away. Rowan passed by, muttering to himself, the sharp sound of his shoes fading toward the far end of the room. Only when the silence returned did Elias dare breathe. Sweat slicked his palms. He had nearly been caught, and yet the fear only deepened his resolve. Rowan had dismissed him, mocked him, told him he was nothing. But the truth was here, hidden in his bag. Later, alone in his apartment, Elias spread the manuscript across his table. He traced the margin notes, connecting them to the statue's code. Slowly, painfully, a pattern emerged. It was not a simple map. It was a trail, a layered riddle spanning multiple references, Each symbol pointed not just to Alexandria, but to something specific hidden within it. His grandfather's words echoed again. If even a fragment of it survived, it could change everything we know. Elias sat back, breathless. He wasn't chasing shadows. The whispers of antiquity were guiding him towards something real, something the world had forgotten. But even as wonder filled him, a darker thought followed. If Rowan or anyone in authority discovered what he held, they would rip it from his hands. He would be erased, just another invisible intern. The revelation was clear. This secret was his alone to protect. And so, with shaking hands but burning eyes, Elias swore an oath to himself. He would follow the whispers of Alexandria, no matter the cost. By now, the whispers had grown too loud to ignore. Elias lived two lives by day, the obedient intern polishing relics under Rowan's cold gaze, and by night, the solitary seeker unraveling a trail no one else dared to follow. His notebook was no longer a collection of sketches and guesses. It was a map of obsession, filled with arrows, translations, and frantic notes scribbled in the margins. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of slipping through cracks. It began with Marcus, the other intern who had mocked Elias weeks before. One evening, he spotted Elias hunched over the manuscript in the staff lounge, scribbling furiously while muttering under his breath. Marcus, ever eager for gossip, leaned in. "Still at it, Eli? What is it this time, Atlantis?" He chuckled. Elias snapped his notebook shut too quickly, too defensively. The movement was a giveaway. Marcus's smirk sharpened. "You've found something, haven't you?" Elias shook his head, forcing a casual tone. "Just research practice. Nothing important." But Marcus wasn't fooled. That night, Elias felt the prickling sensation of eyes on him as he slipped into the archives. By the following morning, Rowan called him into his office. The curator's stare was icy. His fingers steepled under his chin. "I hear you've been indulging in fantasies about Alexandria." His voice dripped with disdain. "Poking around in manuscripts far above your clearance. Tell me, Elias, do you think yourself a scholar?" Elias's throat tightened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. I wasn't breaking any rules, sir. Just studying." Rowan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Studying or stealing credit? Be very careful, boy. I built this museum's reputation on credibility. I will not have an intern embarrassing us with childish conspiracy theories." Elias swallowed hard, forcing down the anger that burned inside him. He wanted to shout that Rowan was blind, that the truth was in his notes, that history itself was calling. But one look at Rowan's sneer told him what would happen. His discovery would be confiscated, twisted, and paraded under the curator's name. That night, Elias's fury became resolve. "They'll never let me have it. If I don't fight for this, I'll lose it forever." So he began working in even deeper secrecy. He shifted his hours, slipping into the archives only when the building was nearly deserted. He carried his notes under his shirt, hidden like contraband. Every page he translated confirmed what he already knew. The manuscript symbols matched the statue's code. Together, they formed directions toward a hidden repository buried beneath Alexandria itself. But word spread quickly. One afternoon, Elias entered the archives to find Rowan already there, flanked by Marcus and two senior researchers. On the table lay the very manuscript Elias had guarded like treasure. Rowan's voice was smug. "Quite the curiosity you stumbled upon, Elias. Marcus mentioned your little hobby. I thought I'd take a look myself. It seems you may have found something after all." Elias froze, his stomach dropping. Marcus shot him a sly glance, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. Rowan tapped the manuscript with a manicured finger. "Of course, a discovery of this magnitude requires capable minds. We'll take it from here." The words rang like a death sentence. Elias felt invisible again, erased before he'd even begun. They would strip the glory, the meaning, the years of dust and sleepless nights, and he would be left with nothing but mockery. Inside his chest, rage and desperation collided. He thought of his grandfather's voice, of all the hours spent alone chasing whispers no one else could hear. His fingernails dug into his palms until it hurt. No, Elias thought savagely. This isn't yours to take. Out loud, he managed only a strained, "I'll keep working on it in my own time." Rowan chuckled coldly, the sound cutting like a blade. "No, Elias. You'll do as you're told, or you'll be dismissed." Dismissed, cast out, erased. That night, as Elias walked home beneath the cold glow of streetlights, the decision solidified in him. He could no longer wait for permission. The manuscript, the statue, the code, they were his path, not Rowan's. And if he didn't claim them now, they would be buried again, lost not to time, but to arrogance. The race had begun. A race not against time, but against authority itself. And Elias vowed he would not lose. The night air in Alexandria was thick with sea salt and smoke from vendors' fires. Elias stood on a crumbling balcony overlooking the city, his notebook open, the map he had pieced together, trembling in his hands. The journey here had been reckless. He had drained his meager savings on a flight, slipped the manuscript pages into his bag under Rowan's watchful eyes, and crossed an ocean on nothing but faith and fury. Yet now, as he stared at the glowing streets below, he felt the weight of destiny pressing on his chest. The coordinates were clear. They pointed to the eastern district of the ancient city, a place where modern construction had swallowed ruins whole. Most scholars dismissed the area as too disturbed to yield anything significant. But Elias knew better. The forged text in the manuscript, scratched symbols beneath layers of deliberate misdirection, had peeled back a secret, a map concealed within another map. By morning, he was standing at the edge of a construction site littered with rusting machinery. The ground was uneven, patches of ancient stone jutting through asphalt. He knelt, tracing the lines of his notebook against the broken earth. The symbols aligned almost perfectly. His pulse thundered. "This is it," he whispered, the words trembling with awe. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, a familiar voice cut through the air, sharp as glass. "So this is where your fantasies led you." Elias spun. Rowan stood at the edge of the site, flanked by Marcus and two other academics, all dressed far too neatly for the dust and rubble. Rowan's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "You didn't think we'd let you come here alone, did you?" Shock froze Elias. His mind reeled. Had they followed him? Or worse, had Marcus betrayed him again, feeding Rowan every step? Rowan stepped closer, his shoes crunching on gravel. "Hand me the notebook. Whatever you think you've found, it belongs to the world, and the world doesn't recognize interns." Elias's chest heaved. Every humiliation, every mocking word, every dismissal rose up inside him like a storm. For a fleeting moment, he considered surrender after all. What could one boy do against the entire weight of authority? But then his gaze fell back to the earth beneath his feet. The ancient stones seemed to whisper. They had waited centuries. They had chosen him. "No," Elias said quietly, his voice shaking but firm. "This doesn't belong to you." Marcus snorted. "You really think you're the hero of this story, Eli? You're nothing." But Elias ignored him. Instead, he dropped to his knees and pressed his palm against a slab half buried in dirt. His fingers traced grooves invisible to the untrained eye, and there it was, the same looping mark, carved faintly into stone. Rowan's smile faltered. The academics leaned in, murmuring, their arrogance giving way to curiosity. Elias's heart soared. For the first time, they saw it too. Using a crowbar he had borrowed from the site's abandoned tools, Elias wedged beneath the slab. His muscles screamed, sweat poured down his brow. But slowly, impossibly, the stone shifted. Dust rose as the ground opened to reveal a staircase spiraling into darkness. Gasps rippled through the group. Rowan stepped forward, his hunger barely disguised. "Remarkable," he muttered. "I'll lead from here." But Elias blocked the stairway, his small frame shaking but unyielding. "Number Not this time. Rowan's eyes hardened. For a moment, Elias thought the man might strike him. The tension crackled in the hot air. But then, without warning, one of the other academics, a young woman Elias had barely noticed before, spoke softly. Let him go first. He found it. He deserves it. The words silenced everyone. Rowan's glare burned holes through her. But the others hesitated. Authority was cracking. Elias tightened his grip on the crowbar, his chest heaving. The choice was his. The code, the map, the buried vault it had, all led to this moment. He turned toward the darkness below, the air cool and ancient against his face. Fear clawed at him, but so did wonder. He whispered, barely audible, I'm coming, grandfather. I'm coming to see what they tried to burn. And with that, Elias stepped into the shadows, the map of eternity unfolding beneath his feet. The air grew colder with every step Elias descended. The spiral staircase was narrow, carved from rough stone that had not seen sunlight in nearly 2,000 years. Dust rained down as his hand slid along the wall, the crowbar clutched tightly in the other. Behind him, Rowan and the others followed, their flashlights slicing through the darkness like blades. Each footfall echoed, hollow and foreboding, as though the ancient earth itself were holding its breath. At the bottom, the passage opened into a vast chamber. Elias froze, his breath stolen from him. Before him stretched rows upon rows of alcoves carved into the walls, each filled with scrolls bound in brittle leather, papyrus stacks sealed in clay jars, tablets etched with symbols that glimmered faintly in the torchlight. It was real. The Library of Alexandria, at least a fragment of it, had survived. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Rowan, ever so arrogant, was struck dumb. His flashlight trembled in his hand. Impossible, he whispered. They said it was all destroyed. Elias stepped forward, his legs weak but steadying, as he moved deeper into the chamber. The silence was sacred, as though the voices of countless scribes still lingered in the dust. He reached for a scroll sealed with wax and traced its faded emblem, a star map, ancient and precise. His heart pounded wildly. This is it, he murmured. They saved it. Memories of his grandfather's voice rose in him, warm and trembling. Imagine, Elias. Imagine if even one shelf of it survived. Now, here he stood, surrounded by shelves that stretched into shadow. But the sanctity shattered when Rowan pushed past him, greed alight in his eyes. We'll catalog everything. Publish. The world will remember my name for this. Anger flared hot in Elias's chest. He grabbed Rowan's arm. No! This isn't yours to claim. It belongs to all of humanity, not to your ego. Rowan's eyes burned with fury. He ripped his arm free, shoving Elias backward. Don't you dare lecture me, boy. Without me, you're nothing. You'd still be scrubbing marble if I hadn't allowed you in my museum. The chamber seemed to tighten around them, the weight of centuries pressing down. The other academics shifted uneasily, watching the clash unfold. Marcus sneered, but the young woman who had defended Elias at the sight whispered, He found it. Rowan, you can't take that from him. For a brief moment, Elias faltered. He was just an intern, no authority, no power. But as he looked around at the scrolls and tablets, he felt something greater surge inside him. This was not about titles. It was about truth. About the voices that had been silenced by fire and arrogance centuries ago. He straightened, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. You mocked me, ignored me, tried to erase me. But history doesn't belong to you, Rowan. It never did. Rowan scoffed, stepping closer, his face inches from Elias's quote. Then what will you do? Stop me? Elias's grip tightened on the crowbar. For a heartbeat, he considered striking, but instead he slammed it into the ground, the sound reverberating like thunder through the chamber. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and everyone flinched. The silence that followed was absolute. Elias's voice rang clear. This place has waited 2,000 years. It chose me to find it, and I will not let you desecrate it. The young woman moved beside him, standing at his shoulder. Then, slowly, one of the older academics nodded in agreement. Authority was shifting. Rowan's power, built on fear and arrogance, was crumbling in the face of truth. Elias turned back to the shelves, reverence softening his voice. These scrolls, they don't just hold knowledge, they hold a warning. Arrogance destroys, humility preserves. He looked at Rowan, eyes blazing. And today, you will learn that lesson. In the silence of the chamber, beneath the weight of forgotten centuries, Elias's words carried the force of prophecy. For the first time, Rowan had no reply. Weeks later, the world was still reeling. News outlets across continents buzzed with headlines. Fragment of the lost Library of Alexandria unearthed. Scholars filled conferences with trembling voices as they described scrolls that rewrote entire chapters of history. Star charts, predating known astronomy, medical treatises more advanced than anything in medieval Europe. Even poems long believed lost to flame. And yet, in every broadcast, every headline, one name was repeated with reverence: Elias. The young intern who had once been invisible now stood at the center of history's stage. Not because of authority, not because of power, but because he had dared to see what others ignored. Invitations poured in from universities, governments, research foundations. For the first time, Elias was addressed not as a boy, not as a dreamer, but as a discoverer. In the quiet of his apartment, however, he sat not with champagne or medals, but with his grandfather's worn photo in his hands. He whispered softly, "We found it, just like you dreamed." Tears blurred his vision, but his chest felt lighter than it ever had. The museum, meanwhile, had undergone its own reckoning. Rowan's name, once spoken with awe, was now synonymous with arrogance and theft. Reports revealed how he had tried to claim the discovery for himself, how his own interns and colleagues had spoken out against him. He was forced into a bitter retirement, his reputation dismantled by the very voices he had long silenced. Marcus, stripped of his smugness, slinked into obscurity, his betrayal remembered but unimportant in the grand tide of history. And the young woman who had defended Elias at the excavation became one of his closest allies, her quiet courage standing as proof that not all within the halls of power were blind. The vault beneath Alexandria was sealed again under protection, preserved not as Rowan had demanded for personal glory, but as Elias insisted, for the world. Teams of international scholars worked tirelessly to catalog its contents, guided by principles of humility and collaboration. The old marks of arrogance that had once burned the library to ashes would not be repeated. For Elias, the greatest reward was not the recognition. It was the silence of those chambers. The moment he first saw the scrolls, the way his grandfather's voice seemed to echo through the dust. He carried that memory like a lantern, a reminder of why he had risked everything. Standing on the shore of the Mediterranean one evening, he watched the horizon fade into fire and gold. The waves whispered against the stones, eternal and unyielding, just as the voices of the past had been. He thought of the statue, of the faint scratches no one else cared to see. A janitor of history, dismissed and mocked, had uncovered what the world thought forever lost. And in that moment, Elias understood the true lesson. The library had not merely been lost to flame, it had been lost to arrogance, to the blindness of those who thought they knew better, who silenced the humble voices at their feet. Now, centuries later, history had chosen differently. He spoke softly into the sea breeze, a vow as much as a prayer. Arrogance destroys, humility preserves, and truth always finds a way back. The waves carried his words out into the dusk, as if the ancient library itself were listening. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.